President of the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, Rick DeVore.
I'm all set.
Good morning. I love the fact that Tina Turner brought us in here because we've been waiting for this moment a long time. I guess it's not great to be Thursday morning after a long Wednesday night, but thank you for coming.
Yeah.
With that said, I think this is a unique panel, and I think when you get done, you're going to really understand why we're so excited about it. When you look at public-private foundations or partnerships, you don't always think about, criminal justice reform and how does that intersect with economic development. So you're going to hear about that today. And really, the one thing about workforce development that we want to emphasize is we really need the shift. We need to pivot and make sure that the programs are inclusive to all. So hopefully you'll hear that this morning. Again, I want to thank you for coming here. And this morning, my co-moderator, my partner in crime is Malenka Clark. We have a unique relationship between the Hudson Weber Foundation and the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan. Joe Hudson is the link. Joe Hudson started the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan in 1984, and obviously the Hudson families and the Webers joined some time ago to form the Hudson Weber Foundation. So in addition to that, we're parking mates. We park right next to each other. We're in the same building. She's the sister that I never had, quite frankly. But with that, we really are looking forward to this meeting. Regarding the Greenway, and Matt Cullen's here today, and he's the lead architect of this, and Mark Wallace, and really the chief architect of the fundraising. But one of the things that I've been quoted on in the media, and I'm just going to emphasize, is for me, and why we're having this meeting, where the Greenway comes in, is for me, good to great. It's good to build it. Great would be economic development and housing development in and around that 27-mile stretch. That's going to be beautiful. So we're going to examine that as well. And before I turn it over to Malenka, I just want to emphasize that there will be Detroit Regional Chamber people walking around with those green cards. We really want to underscore that we want your participation. So I would appreciate taking advantage of that. Malenka?
Terrific. Thank you, Rick. It's wonderful to be here, and let me add my thanks to yours for being with us on this early morning. And I appreciate, Rick, you talking about the special relationship that our foundations have and the length of it, which is quite lengthy. But I think that these three projects in particular also show the depth of that partnership, and I think it's important to note that in the ecosystem of philanthropy, the Community Foundation plays a really special role in the sense that it's a place and a table for funders to come together where we can really align around shared objectives, and certainly the Michigan Justice Fund and NEI are examples of that, of funders coming together to invest our resources together and really have a cohesive voice as we enter into different initiatives and public-private partnerships, and I think that's been a real force multiplier. So before turning it over to our panelists, I did want to just make a few observations about the uniqueness of each of these partnerships, and I'll start with the Michigan Justice Fund. And really, it's worth noting for the Michigan Justice Fund that when we came together to start this initiative, it really in some ways came around a question mark or a problem statement about what the public sector or the choices that the public sector was making and the investments that they were making that in some sense were uninterrogated in terms of what the outcomes were, particularly, I'm talking about the criminal legal system, but our incarceral system in particular. And what we know is that, and I won't overdo it on the stats, I know we've got some good information coming from Ashley, but over the last 3 decades, our spending on incarceration has increased 5 times the rate of our investment in education. And as we think about what that means, again, what are we buying? What are we getting from those investments? There's a whole question, even the question of the data in and of itself, what's the data infrastructure to tell us what the answers to those questions are, is something that we don't have in the way that we should for the amount of money that we put into this system. But we know other things about bias in that system and what if you think about public safety as the ultimate goal, well, what are the harms? What is happening to folks going through this system, to their families, to the communities that are impacted in that way? And so we're excited to hear from Ashley to hear more about how the Justice Fund has oriented around that problem statement and what the partnerships have looked like with the public sector in terms of trying to drive change. But I start that problem statement around a question of investment. And if we're thinking about what ultimately leads to lasting and enduring resilient communities, we can look to the New Economy Initiative, which has an answer to that question, and from its inception has really lifted up in a way that's really been a disruptor in terms of thinking about our economy and the way in which small business and entrepreneurship can really have the opportunity to drive our city and region forward. So really excited to hear from Wafa about what the opportunities are there. And then we heard about the Joe Greenway Partnership with our inaugural executive director, Liana. And as Rick mentioned, we've got Matt Cullen here who's spearheading this unified Greenway campaign, which is about the Greenway. It's also about completing the riverfront. And it's about sustaining these wonderful parkways in a way that will endure. And at its very inception and in the conception of the design, it is itself a public-private partnership. That's the innovation of it from the beginning that has been thought through, and this ambitious goal has been started with significant resources and capacity from the city, the county, the state, and also from federal resources. So much to talk about. And to start, I think we're going to start with Wafa to just set it up for us and tell us more for those that are not initiated about the New Economy Initiative.
Yeah. So thank you, Malinka. Thank you, Rick. The New Economy Initiative is a funder collaborative. And I want to start by saying in the Detroit region, we are incredibly lucky to have philanthropy that works together, that funds their money together, and really sets a goal and works towards that goal. So NEI was really created by the idea that, the old saying that when the United States gets a cold, Michigan gets the flu. Funders came together and said, how do we make our economy more resilient? How do we diversify the industry within Southeast Michigan? And NEI was born out of that idea. Initially, it was a funder. They pulled together $100 million to really start to attract and bring in tech, high growth, entrepreneurship, and it's really evolved to become a national model. We get people from all over the country looking at NEI and calling us and saying, how have you done this? How do we duplicate this work? And how do we make this happen? Like, Detroit has really been on the forefront of entrepreneurship support and doing this work. And really, the rest of the country is just starting to come along to realize how important entrepreneurship is. In our state, 50% of employees are employed by small businesses. And we really believe that we need to start putting resources into those small businesses to make sure that they grow. As we think about entrepreneurship, as we think about our economy, the next Fortune 500 company is already here. The idea is with somebody in our ecosystem, is with somebody in our region, and how do we engage them and how do we give them the resources to be able to start their business, grow their business, scale it, and be able to hire people within our region and really start to grow that environment. We are, like I said, we've been around since 2007. We're a funder collaborative. We're continuing to fund nonprofits that do the business support work. And we really look at the ecosystem, the small business ecosystem holistically. And we're constantly moving and improving to fill the gaps in the ecosystem. We're always assessing what industry is missing here. How do we fill those gaps? How are entrepreneurs, especially women and people of color, how are they not being supported, and how can we fill those gaps to be able to support them? There's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work at the regional level. There's a lot of work still to be done within our own network. But more importantly, we really want to encourage the state to step in and to start to support entrepreneurs and small businesses the way that they do some of the larger industries. And We really want to make sure that there is a voice for entrepreneurs because they are hustling and they are doing the work day to day, and they don't have the resources to be able to go to Lansing or to be able to have a lobbyist to say, we don't have resources, we don't have an office of entrepreneurship, we don't know how to navigate all of the resources that are available. How do we make it easier for entrepreneurs? And how do we provide the incubators? How do we provide the resources? How do we provide the capital and make sure that they're capital ready to be able to access all of these resources that are available to them? So this is really the goal of NEI, is to grow entrepreneurs to be able to support the entrepreneurship ecosystem and really make our economy more robust and more small business friendly.
Well, Fa, could you maybe share with people real quickly approximately how many grants a year, dollar amount? I know it's a lot of grants, but dollar amount?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we do between $5 and $6 million in grants. We have 32 grantees currently, and we really divide our grantees into 3 buckets. We grant money to capital providers, which are CDFIs. We have practical assistance, technical assistance providers, those that actually do the on-the-ground work that will help a business get their accounting in order, help a business with their legal, help them find a brick and mortar location, and really do the hand-holding and the really hard work that comes with technical assistance. And then we have what we call trusted connectors. Those are the organizations that are in the communities that either that know every single business on their block or have the language and are able to be that are trusted by the entrepreneurs, that can take the entrepreneurs, assess what their needs are, and connect them with the technical assistance that they need.
Thanks.
Should we move to
Ashley's next?
Yep.
Thank you. So the Michigan Justice Fund is a really exciting initiative of the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan. We are a funder collaborative and a philanthropic initiative designed to address issues of mass incarceration across the state. We have 3 primary areas of focus. One is supporting the economic mobility of directly impacted people, which is our workforce development and reentry work. The second is reducing the state's reliance on incarceration. And the third is supporting advocacy and movement work towards addressing these issues. We are a statewide initiative and are really excited to work with partners across the state to address these issues and understand that different parts of the state have different needs and different approaches for addressing them. We also know, and one of the focuses of the fund is making sure that people understand how widely communities across Michigan are impacted by mass incarceration. Michigan is 10th in the United States for most people incarcerated by population. Additionally, we know that there are racial disparities across the criminal legal system. African American people make up 14% of the state's population, but 53% of the prison population. And of that population, 30% of the individuals inside of the Michigan Department of Corrections, that's people who are incarcerated, come from Wayne County. So there are clear disparities. And we also know that directly impacted people have very serious challenges when it comes to employment. The national employment rate or unemployment rate is about 3.9%, but for directly impacted individuals, unemployment is at about 27%. And so these are very sobering facts, but I choose to see it as an opportunity because now that we understand how many people are impacted, it's an invitation for all of us to work together to address these issues. One other thing that I forgot to say is that we know that in Michigan right now, there are between 2 and 3 million people with some sort of criminal record. And so that's about 1 in 4, or closer to 1 in 3 individuals. And so this is an issue that impacts all of us. It's across socioeconomic levels, but we know that people that come from poor communities are disproportionately represented as well. And so we see this as a chance for us to come together through a variety of mechanisms to address these issues. We have a lot of partnerships that we're really excited about that I'll get into a little bit later, but are really looking for opportunities to shift public spending away from punitive systems that we know don't deliver the results that we're looking for, towards more innovative and collaborative approaches that will lead us to more thriving communities, which are the real answers to public safety.
Liana?
Well, I am.
Got your boss 15 feet away, nothing like it, huh?
Right. I got a number of my board members in here, so I'll be on my best behavior. So the new kid on the block. So the Joe Louis Greenway Partnership was launched formally in 2022. And so I think I just need to lay the foundation for this discussion and what the Joe Louis Greenway is. It's a 27.5-mile interconnected path that connects 4 communities in Wayne County: Dearborn, Detroit, Highland Park, and Hamtramck. And so for those of you who've not had an opportunity to venture in those areas, I just want you to think about taking 27 miles through urban settings and really developing some green space and some activations that will connect neighborhoods. You really have to visualize that the Greenway is taking the beauty of the riverfront, the world-renowned riverfront, and taking it right into the neighborhoods in some of the most challenged parts of the cities. And then what it's doing is making sure that as we think about green space, as we think about the health and wellness of our communities, downtown as a neighborhood, it's saying that those same things should be in other neighborhoods within our city. So the partnership is here as a steward and a partner to all of the stakeholders, the residents that are involved. We're here to support the programming, to augment the services that the city of Detroit will provide, and to work with the other municipalities, Highland Park, Dearborn, and Hamtramck, to ensure that this amazing transformational development has the long-term sustainability in perpetuity. We'll be here to support the endowment that'll be housed at the Community Foundation, and with our partners, Hudson Weber, William Davidson, and all of our other funders, to ensure that when we think about this project and the magnitude and the capacity for change, that residents are at the center, but that it does provide a unique experience for individuals to visit the cities. And so as I think about it with the partnership and what we're going to do and how we begin to think about our work, it's really how does the Greenway become that attraction in our region, that not only are we driving up to Mackinac 4 hours, but people from Mackinac are driving to Detroit to experience the Greenway and to experience our communities and our neighborhoods in such a way that highlights the neighborhoods, that highlights the residents in their highest and best way. And so it's my honor to step in as this inaugural executive director to really begin to work with community, to work with our partners to set that vision and to make sure that we're able to execute on that. When I think about the city of Detroit, when I think about our partners and the other municipalities, there is some historical trauma there. And so to create a partnership and a nonprofit that works with cities to do this work is really thoughtful to ensure that there is some accountability between all of us so that we do deliver to the residents.
Thank you. Mike, I think I'm first up. I'm going to start with Wafa, and this is really exciting to me. Talk to us a little bit about this. You're leading a statewide coalition to focus on micro business lending, which obviously is different than your current charge of just more of a Wayne County or Detroit centric. So can you talk a little bit about that?
So we have a micro business policy coalition, and coming out of COVID, we really saw a gap in the policy and how the state thinks about small businesses, specifically micro businesses, those that have 10 and under employees, and those that are really staples in the neighborhoods, the neighborhood businesses that are really keeping the neighborhoods alive and building up the economy in these neighborhoods. As the state and the federal government, first it was the PPP. We know that didn't go to the small businesses, and then PPP 2 did a little bit better. But for these micro businesses that might not have banking relationships, they weren't able to access these programs. And then the state had a couple relief programs, and also they were flops. They didn't go to the people they were supposed to. A big chunk of the money went to the casinos, and those are not the people that the funds were intended to. So we really started with the problem, and we really started looking at how do we solve this problem? How do we give a voice to micro businesses? And let's figure out what are some of the low-hanging fruits that we can advocate for. And so we looked at rural, urban, west side, north, and we got a coalition together to really look at how we can make our state more small business, micro business friendly. And we started putting together a policy agenda. I mean, and at the top of our list is we want the state to define a micro business so that when they build programs in the future, they can dedicate funding and resources directly to those micro businesses and really target those businesses that need the most support and need the most help and are really carrying the neighborhoods and are really the anchors of economic development. And we have quite a few other. We're pushing for an Office of Entrepreneurship within the state that can really be the place for small businesses to go to be able to navigate all of the state departments and all of the resources that are available to them. And we really want to make sure that the state understands that there is 50% of employees are employed by small businesses, and it's a very important part of our economy, and it's incredibly important that we put resources towards growing and maintaining those businesses here in our region, and really start to grow those businesses, attract more entrepreneurship into our region, and become the startup state, essentially.
And just if I can add, as a recovering banker, I can say this. I don't know if people are aware of this, but when PPP was first stood up, the first instructions from the federal government to the banks were it was a program for existing customers. You got to think about that one for just a minute. Existing customers, the people we're talking about serving here didn't have a bank, right? So, I mean, that was not a good start to PPP. Now, that was changed, but I mean, that's why this was so important.
Yep. Yeah, intentions matter. My question is for Liana, and I wonder if you might say a bit more about the specific impacts you might anticipate for neighborhoods and residents in the Greenway.
Great question. I think, in the context of this conversation, when we talk about, the power and the impact of public-private partnerships, the Greenway is a really wonderful example, modern-day example of that, and how that can be successful in providing public space and providing large-scale projects. In terms of the effort from the city, right, having the philanthropy come together and all of the different stakeholders allows the city to be able to leverage its resources. I think we have to remember that cities aren't designed to do everything. And we need these partnerships to bring in other stakeholders that are willing to invest in these large-scale projects that will have a lifetime of positive results for residents. When I think about the Greenway, we're talking about the opportunity for economic development. We're talking about how do we ensure that this project is an actual true catalyst that spurs more economic development that supports the health and wellness of the residents and the communities that are already there. For the partnership, we're thinking about how are all the stakeholders, the cities, the municipalities from the state, the federal, the county, able to come together and pull together strategies that ensure that we're really layering these efforts. When I think about the endowment, we were able to pull together this endowment that says we want to take the stakeholders and the funding, and we want to think about how we fund this project to ensure that the Greenway is active with people. We can develop this project, but if residents don't enjoy it, if visitors don't come to it, it really is not serving the intended purpose. And so to have the endowment, to have the partners come together and say, we want to make sure that we are here as partners, that the funding will be there so that there's programming, so that there are resources, so that there are opportunities for this space in its entirety. And I think it's different, right? Most of the times we're thinking about a park that's in one space and that's touching just one or two communities. This Greenway is touching over 23 communities. There'll be over 16,000 households impacted by this Greenway. It's going to increase access to green space to neighborhoods and individuals who may have parks, but they may not be able to get to the parks. There are access points that cut between communities where residents will be able to kind of walk to it from their homes. And so to have all of the stakeholders come together with this unified mindset and this idea about how do we make this work, and how are we thoughtful about residents and making sure that we're elevating that. And then the final thing is thinking about what you're talking about, Wafa, is the small business opportunities. We have to be intentional about the programming, about the housing, to ensure that these strategies include residents. Residents have the capacity to do these things, to be at the table, to support. And the partnership is here as that partner to ensure that the funders, the stakeholders, the city, we all have the resources, and we're really congregating around the communities in the Greenway.
Ashley, you're next up, but before I get to my question, I want to brag on Ashley just a real quick moment. She didn't say this, but in addition to being an attorney, which makes her qualified for this work, more importantly in my mind, she was a public defender in the city of New York. So I think there's no doubt that she definitely has walked in the shoes of a lot of these situations. And I'm very, very proud of that. But can you give us some, you probably wondered where in the heck was he going on that? But you never can tell with me, right, Ashley? Can you give us some examples of public-private partnerships? And also, you do have a lot of policymakers at this conference. What would be your call to action for them? So this is kind of a two-part question.
So there's so much to be excited about and proud of with the Michigan Justice Fund, but there are two partnerships that really come to mind when I think about public-private partnership. As Malenka mentioned earlier in her remarks, one of the challenges that the state is facing is a lack of data transparency. And so even more fully understanding how many people are impacted is a win. And we see part of our duty as to stimulate more transparency and data. And so one of the relationships that we've developed is a partnership between the University of Michigan Youth Policy Lab and the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, where we have resourced a fellow who sits inside of LEO and is looking at public spending as it pertains to justice-involved individuals, and is not only looking for new opportunities to invest in this population, but looking more closely at programs and spending that's already taking place and how justice-involved individuals can be more contemplated and centered in initiatives that already exist. And so we're really excited about the research and data that's come out of that initiative, and have also set up a second fellowship that's inside of the State Court Administrator's Office looking at youth justice in a similar fashion. So that's one example of a partnership that's really going to yield significant dividends past the life of the fund. A second partnership that we're really excited about is with Michigan Works. So last December, we made a substantial round of investments in organizations and entities that are focused on innovation in workforce development and reentry. And Michigan Works applied for 2 grants, one at Oakland County, so a locally based organization, and then statewide Michigan Works. And the statewide organization of Michigan Works is looking at how their programming can better support directly impacted individuals and developing best practices for supporting people who are returning home from jail and prison. And one of the things we're most excited about with that partnership is that they have decided to engage directly impacted leaders in their strategy. And so they're not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk of engaging people who best understand the impact of mass incarceration and infusing their insights and expertise into the strategy that they hope to execute. And one of the things that makes the fund, I think, really distinctive is that we have worked hard to make sure that we have a wide variety of voices at the table, which ranges from policymakers, elected officials, and communities that are most impacted and directly impacted individuals. So to see that partnership emerge is something that we're really proud of and excited to see what comes next. And in terms of policy opportunities, something that's really on my mind and on the mind of the fund is Clean Slate. So Clean Slate legislation was adopted and passed in 2020. And as of this April, the Clean Slate process has become automated. For those who are less familiar, Clean Slate is an initiative focused on expungement, because we know that there are a lot of challenges and hardships that face people with a criminal record. And through Clean Slate, there's an expanded expungement process. And as I said, as of April, for people who have convictions with that fall into certain categories, their records will be automatically expunged. And while we're really excited about the opportunity, one of the things that we are still working to navigate is how to make sure that people actually know that this is happening, because there isn't a widespread strategy for notification around the existence of this exciting opportunity. And then once people do understand that they have this opportunity, making sure that they can navigate the process. And so we're looking to continue stimulating partnerships and relationships with publicly funded entities and government stakeholders to make sure that we're able to maximize this opportunity so that we can better stimulate Michigan's workforce and support directly impacted populations, their families, and the broader community.
It's actually worth noting on that expungement piece that data has shown for folks that have criminal records, if you look at blacks and whites with the same, there have been not studies, but actually, planned, I'm forgetting the word, it's not just looking at people that have records, but people that pretend that they have records, whatever that's called, and have similar experience as they've gone into the employment market. The data has shown that Black people are, same set of circumstances, same background, are penalized more for having a record than whites that have that same record, and that in fact, whites with records are still admitted into entry-level positions, which what this study was for, than Blacks without records. So the bias and discrimination that we have in the employment market is certainly exacerbated by these records, and so that's another win for the expungement work. But I want to ask a question for Wafa, which is about NEI and the sort of the national model that and support for entrepreneurship that you guys have been able to bring forward. We're very lucky in Southeast Michigan to have the work of NEI, but obviously that's not for the state. Is there anything that you can share with the audience about opportunities for replication?
Yeah, I want to start by saying, we have the Michigan Justice Fund, we have the Joe Louis Greenway Parkways, and then we have NEI, which focus on entrepreneurship. And it all seems a little disjointed, but the collaboration and really connecting all of this is what makes us a national model, because we look at returning citizens. How can we, entrepreneurship has a low barrier for entry. How do we get them into the entrepreneurship pipeline? How do we make that a possibility? How do we make them, the CEOs of companies once they're, out and ready to rejoin society? Because that is a low barrier for entry. So we work with the Michigan Justice Fund on returning citizens and entrepreneurship. And then with the Joe Louis Greenway, how do we think about that intentionally to incorporate, the folks that have been in those communities for a really long time? How do we take their entrepreneurial ideas and get them involved in the Joe Louis Greenway development? And how do we make sure that they're included and at the table as their neighborhoods change and as their neighborhoods develop? We really want to think about this stuff intentionally, and we've thought about this stuff intentionally, which is why we've become a national model. And we've been very lucky at NEI because we've had funders who are willing to let us try anything, to kind of test things out. And sometimes it works out really well, and sometimes we have to pivot, and it doesn't work out so well. And we've been really able to document all of our ups and downs and what's been successful, and be able to share that with the country and really with our state. And we want people to replicate what NEI is doing in Southeast Michigan throughout the state, because it is working. The data shows that it's working. We are leveraging the dollars that philanthropy is putting into real development, into real generational wealth building. And ultimately, that's what we want. We want entrepreneurs, especially entrepreneurs of color and women, and those that have barriers. We want them to grow generational wealth. We want them to make money. We want them to employ from their communities and from people around them, and we want them to grow our economy to become more robust.
If I could, too, when I think about what you said about how our different organizations are interconnected, for the partnership, there is information out there that shows that creating green space in urban settings does reduce crime. It does improve the health and wellness of the people who live there. And so when I think about Michigan Justice Fund, there is direct tie in how our neighborhoods and our cities are built that really drive crime. And so as we begin to understand the importance of beautiful green space that is right in individuals' backyard, that really ties to saying how we are trying to shift the narrative, how we're trying to shift our population and our communities. And then the opportunities for small business with residents is just there with the Greenway. And what we want to do with our partners is make sure that we are intentional each and every way, checking ourselves to make sure our residents at the center. And that is the thing that we should use as our barometer as we start to measure and think if we're getting off track, to go back to that question. Are residents at the center? Are we ensuring that residents' voices are included? And how are we building programs? How are we activating the space that represents the unique cultures in each of the 23 neighborhoods? I mean, all of these communities are not a monolith. Each one can be different, and we can think about how we layer that in. And so that's just another tie that I felt was really important in all of our organizations.
Liana, since you have the floor, so to speak, last week you cut the ribbon on southwest portion.
Southwest.
What's next?
So for the partnership, we have the first section in the neighborhood that is in the West Warren community that's going to be coming online in October. And as we think about it, it's how do we program that space? How do we get the word out about this amazing project that is right in individuals' backyards so that they can begin to envision what this is going to be like for their families. And so we're doing a lot of planning through that process. And so awareness is a big thing for the Greenway because it's a big project, and it's a project that has been thought about and conceptualized, I think, for over 20 years in this region. And now to actually have the resources from ARPA and the city to be able to come in and begin the construction, and all of the stakeholders and partners through the Unified Greenway come together and say we need to make this happen. We can't lose this moment right now. It's really to make sure that the stakeholders, the corporations, everyone in the region knows that this is not just a Detroit project. This is a project for Michigan, and everyone needs to understand how important it is. We want to make sure that this is something that's drawing in individuals. Resident engagement is a big priority for us. And then finally, I would say, making sure that we are in tune with our partners and how we think about the community, not just today, but we think about 20, 30, 40 years in the future, because we don't want to make decisions that are perfect as our communities are right now, but then have adverse impact as our communities change and shift throughout this process. And so we want to be intentional about interrogating our purpose, interrogating our intention, and to make sure that we do this right and that we are responsible stewards of this project so that your children's children can be experiencing this Greenway in their communities and extending it outside of its current footprint. Like if we were to sit here and close our eyes, it's 27 miles now, but the potential for what it can grow to be is magnified by all of us in this room.
And if we would be remiss if we didn't shout out Megan from the city of Detroit has been hugely helpful on this project.
Yeah.
She is definitely our Greenway champion.
Yes, she is definitely our Greenway champion.
Terrific. I just want to remind folks that we're going to open it up for audience questions in a moment, and then turn to Ashley to ask you a question. And so much of the examples that you shared, Ashley, have been around the fund and philanthropy, in particular, partnering with the public sector. Are there examples, or what are the opportunities around the business sector, which is so important to advancing the goals along the whole line, but certainly with Michigan Justice Fund too?
So I think there's a multifaceted answer to that question. And I just want to underscore that I think Michigan is at a really, really critical moment where we have an opportunity to decide who we want to be as a state, because understanding the impact and the breadth of the ways and the numbers of people who are impacted and have criminal records, we're facing a workforce shortage, and also navigating how to best address recidivism. And engaging and employing formerly incarcerated individuals is a way to address both of those things at the same time. And so I am offering an invitation for people to think along with us creative ways to do this, but I will also offer some suggestions on how to do this. So I think there are a number of really interesting and exciting organizations that we partner with and support that are training directly impacted people after incarceration. And so one suggestion, because I think a lot of people get stuck on, well, how do I find people? How do I identify the population? Partnering with organizations who are already engaged with returning citizens is one way to meet and engage people, and to partner with organizations who are especially focused on supporting this population and helping you as an employer navigate best practices for making sure that their employment is maintained. I also think as it pertains to education, I'm really excited about community colleges and stimulating partnerships and pathways through with the Michigan Department of Corrections and other local jails on how to stimulate opportunity and engagement with community colleges. One of the reasons that I think they're really exciting is because community colleges exist across the state and are accessible to people, in particular in rural communities. We know because of the governor's task force on jail and pretrial incarceration that rural populations have the fastest growing presence in jails across Michigan. And so making sure that that community and those populations are supported through opportunities like education is one way to support, to address recidivism and to support this population in their economic mobility. And then finally, something that I'm thinking a lot about is policymakers and the chance to reduce barriers into certain professional licensing. So we made a grant to Safe and Just Michigan in December that is allowing them to look at ways that through legislative advocacy, we can reduce barriers to healthcare professions, because right now, people who have any sort of involvement with the criminal legal system, but in particular felonies, are excluded from entering certain professions. And so reducing barriers to entry is another way that we can stimulate employment and engagement for this population.
And we'll I'll have what he's having. Well, Fa, we're going to end with you before we get to the general Q&A. And I think you would agree with all of us in saying that for the state to really reach its full potential, we have to have an economy that's more inclusive and equitable. How do you see that working with public-private partnerships?
I think we need to recognize that there is an equity gap and that there is really an equity problem. And I think until we get to the point where we can say, yes, there is an equity gap, we're not going to do anything. But we have to recognize the equity gap, and then we have to put resources towards that equity gap. And philanthropy can only do so much. There's only so much funding that philanthropy can do. And really, government is the ultimate philanthropy. And government needs to step in and really put resources behind technical assistance, especially in under-resourced communities. And government really needs to start to get rid of some of the red tape. You know, there was an article a couple years ago talking about a restaurant has like 78 steps in the city of Detroit. It needs to go through 78 steps to open. And I know the city is working to address that, but those are some real barriers to entry for under-resourced communities. And that's not, and I don't want to pick on Detroit because it's not just Detroit, it's really municipalities across the board. It's cities, it's counties, and it's the state. I mean, the state has so much red tape that makes it so difficult to navigate. And I really challenge anybody in this room to try and find an easy how-to to register with Laura, or to find a contact person, or to really navigate anything within the state that a small business has to do. And that is compounded with, if English is a second language, if, there's reading barriers, there's a lot of barriers, and until we start to identify them and say there is very much a racial equity problem, there is really, and we need to directly address it, and we need to directly start to put funding in under-resourced communities. And that includes, the urban core, that includes rural communities, and we really need to be intentional about funding those communities and funding the support that comes along with that.
Okay, well, I think I'm going to ask the staff, and we have microphones around in terms of Q&A.
Okay. Hi, Joel Haroni Harris, Public Sector Consultants. This question is for Leona. I'm curious, how do you address a widespread sentiment that greenways and other non-motorized infrastructure is not for Detroiters, is not for people in the neighborhoods. It's for people that look like me, frankly. And so I'm curious, what strategies are you using to address that sentiment that's pretty prevalent that I've heard. I'm a Detroit resident, so.
Yeah, I think it is a psychological shift that Detroit has to go through. As I've lived in Detroit my entire life, and I would say that's not the case. The Detroit that I grew up in had parks everywhere. It was a Detroit that I could walk to a park. I walked to the school park. And I think what's happened throughout years of disinvestment is that has crept into our mindset that it's not for us. But I would say that it is. And what I would say is that when I think about this process, I'm 2 months into this role, and one of the first things that kind of began to sit into my head is we have baked into our minds that we're the motor city, and the motor was the car, but the motor is the people. And so when we shift that, it takes us to a different place, right? And so I don't subscribe to who we are not. I subscribe to who we are. And as much as we talk about Detroit and deficit and what we can't do and what's not possible, then that's just what sits in. I talk about us and our people in terms of our asset and what we can do. And so you can't tell me what Detroit can't be, right? No one can tell us that. Detroit has been a contemporary community in the city for hundreds of years, and so over 100 years, so we'll continue to do that. And we have shifted, and we have changed, and we have built, and we have torn down, and we have rebuilt. And so greenways not being for us is not something that I think is who we are at our core, and I think it's a part of the psychological shift that is really rooted in how I think about this work and how I go into communities. Is how do we begin to unpack that idea of people telling us who we're not?
And I think you've done a great job of listening, the whole group, and and really making sure that the voice is heard, and not just, but really getting at it, making trips, seeing other communities. I know down to Atlanta, for example, but I really think that the people in the know that are part of this, the community, I think would echo the fact that it's really been well done. Not a top-down, ground-up.
Yeah.
But
One, you guys killed this. I didn't even really want to come to this conference this year, to be honest. And I got a good wife, so she brought me here. You guys murdered this. Seriously, such a great job. Ashley, I'm thinking about my career as you were talking, and I'm thinking about all the steps. I worked at the county. I teach at community college now. Negotiated a deal with Cullen here about a jail. And I think I was cynical about the business community when I was in government. Now that I'm in it, I get that multiple things can be true. And so, and what Dan used to say is, you can do well by doing good. And I think about our business right now. We have so many jobs open that we just need people who are going to grind. Just straight up. You want to build a helmet? Please. It's like $20 an hour. But when you say this, I'm like, this should have clicked earlier for me. I know better. I used to work at city council. I know better, right? So how do you recommend folks that, I'm all about, my whole family's returning citizens, so I know them. This is my life. This is, God loves second chances, right? And third and fourth and fifth and sixth. But what's the next step? Like you said, partner with organizations, and I wrote that down on my phone. What's the next step? Because we got a whole shift. We need to build a lot of helmets this year. And I'm thinking and she delivers a lot of packages. What's the next step? How would you approach this from this side of the table?
So thank you for the question. I'm really excited. The Michigan Justice Fund is housed at the foundation. A lot of our work is powered by amazing consultants. One of them, Sarah McCauley's here. And then we also work closely with Corporation for a Skilled Workforce. And one of the things that we're planning to do is a series of briefings for people who are in different business communities on how to best support this population. So I do think, to be clear, that the business community does have a responsibility to care and engage, but I think that advocates and people like myself who understand the issue and have access to this population should also be facilitating the development of these relationships. But it requires people to sit at the table with us and think through this. So one thing that we're thinking about is, because I really do believe there are people who care and could be engaged, but truly just do not know where to begin. And so being at the Michigan Justice Fund and having this platform and opportunity, one of the things that we want to do is set tables to invite people to learn and engage with us, and then create plans for action. And I mean this too, for people that are interested right now, I have a list of organizations that would be very happy to talk to you about supporting their program participants and employing people as soon as possible. And so there's a longer term strategy, which is this table setting and broader strategy development. And then also people right now with returning citizens who are truly hungry and desire full-time employment. And then I also just want to shout out, we have a relationship with the Center for Economic Opportunity, which is an organization that works on supporting returning citizens with employment opportunities, but they're designed to be short-term employment opportunities that then transition into longer-term engagement across different industries. And so they're up and running in both Oakland and Wayne counties, and would love to talk to people that are interested in hiring returning citizens as well. So I'll just send out our annual report. We can start there. And then also would love to hear from people that want to sit at these tables and work with us on this issue.
My name's John Broad, and I used to run Crime Stoppers of Michigan. And I've always been fascinated in terms of why young people get involved in crime. And I learned that the predictor of people who get involved with crime are people who are chronically absent. And Michigan has the highest, one of the very highest chronic absenteeism in the country. Detroit leads the country in terms of, for major cities, in chronic absenteeism. And we have to do everything that we can to be able to do something about this. Detroit alone, this year we expect there's going to be 30,000 children who will be chronically absent. As a result, you're going to see quite a bit of crime. And but it doesn't have to be that way. There are people that are really working hard to try and intervene with these kids, but it starts in school. It starts in kindergarten. And I have an organization now called Helping Kids Go to School, which works with parents to try to find out what's getting in the way for them to get their kids to school, so they're not chronically absent, so they don't fall behind, and so they don't reach a point of despair that they're going to turn to crime. So I think those things are really important for us to consider.
It's really great. And I want to also add to what you're saying. And when we talk about public-private partnerships, this is, again, where the state needs to step in. The state needs to provide that safety net. We need to do better for working moms and women who are entrepreneurs. We need to provide daycare. We need to be able to provide family leave, and that's all where that's all at the state level, and that's all that we should be talking about this, and we really should be thinking about all of this holistically. And again, when we talk about what we can do on the philanthropy side, we can only take it as far as we can take it, and then policy makers need to step in and really implement some of those larger, really life-changing initiatives, and be able to pay for, make it so people can afford childcare, people can send their kids to after-school programs, and be able to step in so that chronic absenteeism isn't a problem.
John, you and I have met, as you know, and I would say, though, I want to add to that, we got to get rid of many of the other barriers, including transportation. There's too many moms and dads in Detroit that, they have to take multiple buses just to get one child to school, then it's off to the next one. So, we just need to do a better job on wraparound services and look together about what the barriers are, why that's happening, not, be punitive of the folks. Yep. Thank you for the work. I want to thank everybody for coming, Malenka and I. The common thread here is that Hudson Weber and Community Foundation is involved in every one of these and has funds in every one of these. So I want to thank everybody for coming and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.